Transform your Christian school culture through the Flourishing Journey with Dr. Edward Bunn, ACSI Professional Development Director.
Well, hello, flourishing practitioners, and welcome to the second episode around the flourishing domain of well-being. Recent studies have concluded that 75% of U.S. high school students expressed boredom, anger, sadness, fear, and even stress while in school. On a 10-point scale where a normal value for adults is around 3.8, American teens rated their stress rate at an average score of 5.8. So during this series on well-being, we want to discuss the contributing factors to these statistics and even some practical ways to help students and educators in our Christian schools journey on a path of well-being. So with us today is Nancy Gillespie, a licensed school counselor for over 15 years and has served as a school counselor supervisor to over 25 master's level students. Nancy is passionate about her role and is convinced she has the greatest job in the world as she invests in the lives of young people. Nancy is currently pursuing a PhD in counselor education and supervision from The Ohio State University. Her research interests include adolescent mental health, COVID disruptions, the effects of technology on teens, and developmental assets, including faith and Christian education. She was instrumental in bringing the Mental Health and Wellbeing Network to ACSI and is an advocate of mental health and well-being for staff and students alike. Wow, we're so excited to have you. So welcome to the Flourishing Podcast today, Nancy.
Hi, Edward. Thank you so much for having me here. It is honestly humbling, but also just a great privilege to be a part of this time together.
Oh, man, I look forward to this conversation we're going to have today. So I'd love to jump right in on question number one, which this is a hot topic. This is a hot button topic, right? So how does social media impact the mental health of young people? What are you seeing in your research?
Gosh, in my research and in my practice, I will tell you, this is something I see daily with students. Let me take you back to about, maybe it was around 2011, 2012. I was just noticing, in our school, so many students were really struggling with mental health, the amount of panic attacks, the amount of anxiety and depression and motivation. And I actually called our children's hospital and I said, I don't know what I'm seeing, what's happening. And it was pretty phenomenal because we didn't name it then. It was just there's a trend and it's not going in the right direction, but we're not sure what it is. Well, I think now we're able to go back and just to put things in a timeline, iPhones and Android phones came out in 2007 and 2008. Instagram came out in 2010, Snapchat 2011, TikTok wasn't until 2016, which really, in the big scheme of things, is not that long ago. Right. But in the advent of those things, since 2010, if we look at from 2010 to 2020, the average rate of depression among adolescents increased 150%. And so when you look at what was the advent of that, there's just no way we can take social media out of that equation, and why? What is it doing? It is absolutely impacting. I often think of adolescence as one of our most valuable, just subgroups of people, but also one of the most vulnerable. Their brains aren't developed yet. They're still trying to figure out life and how to navigate. And because their brains are so vulnerable, they're so quickly just adapting to what their phone is telling them that they should be doing or what they shouldn't be doing. Again, just some more statistics and data. So on average, the average teen is on their phone 4.8 hours a day just on social media. If we did screen time, it would be way more than that. But just social media, it's more than 4.5 hours a day. A third of adolescents are on their social media sites more than 5 hours a day. So that is roughly 35 hours a week of nothing but social media content. So how does that impact their mental health? Well, it impacts it greatly. What are the images they're seeing? What are the asks that they're getting, especially when it comes to nude pictures and sexting and all those things? Those things are happening, and those impact the way our our children, our kids are being impacted, that footprint that is being laid upon them. That's a lot of time in a day to be spending on that. And it's time away from family. It's time away from going to church and going to church camp and, being in youth group and being part of a sports team or a drama club or band. It's pulling students away into isolation. And so all those things, social media has really just created this, just a tumultuous time for them. I thought this was so interesting, but there's a new term that's out and it's called nomophobia. And it actually stands for no mobile phone phobia. And at first I had to read, like, is this just a Wikipedia thing? Like, is this legitimate? And it's absolutely a legitimate thing. Actually, some researchers were trying to get it into psychologists' DSM, where it was actually a diagnosis. It has not succeeded as that, but they are using this as an actual fear that adolescents and even some adults may have from being separated from their phone, losing connectivity, or just not having access to that. So when anything has that big of grip on us, when it has that almost addictive quality to it, wow, that is impacting their mental health because they can't separate from that. I was thinking, this was a few years ago. I was in my car and I was driving, and I think I was preparing. I was going to be talking to a group of my students about phone usage, and this really just, I don't know, this analogy just kind of hit me. Like, what does the Bible say about social media? And obviously the word social media is not in there, but in Genesis, it says this, it says, you must not eat from the tree of knowledge. And I think God in his infinite wisdom knew way ahead of time that access to knowledge is not a good thing. And in fact, the consequence to that was, do not eat from the tree of knowledge, for you will surely die. And what did we do? We handed every adolescent in America, over 87% of our young people have access to a smartphone. And we said, here you go. Here's unlimited knowledge, but there's no filter of wisdom, right? We did not filter this with anything. It's just unadulterated knowledge. And I think that is impacting the way they think, because their view of the world, their view of self is just very skewed. And it's not necessarily coming from a biblical worldview, as we would probably hope for most of our students. And it's really just, it's disrupting. It's disrupting. Some scientists are even just saying that the impact on their brain could really be altering just who they are, that kind of that epigenetic feel where maybe their brains are being transformed, and we're just raising a new generation that is very different in the way they think, in the way they feel, in the way they can't get control of their feelings. So how does social media impact mental health? In every way, I would say.
Yeah, that's great. I found your answer very valuable. A couple of highlights just for me that I'd like to kind of push back into our viewership today is, so much knowledge, yet not a filter for wisdom. I loved how you said that, how you approached it, because I think we as adults and we as those voices in the lives of children and in the lives of teens, we have to become and help them be that filter of wisdom, if you will. And you mentioned 35 hours a week. I mean, wow, that's a full-time job, just scrolling my phone, right? I'm working a full-time job as a teen, scrolling my phone, right? So how do we become better filters of wisdom and help our students navigate that? And it's so addictive. I think one of my new pet peeves, Nancy, is I now find myself at stoplights, and when the light turns green, the cars do not move in front of me. Why? Because everybody is on their phone. And in other words, they can't get away from it. You mentioned the phobia, right? They can't get away from the phone, even in waiting on a stoplight. 60 seconds. I have to have my phone. I have to be searching. I have to be looking and scrolling. But the biggest takeaway, though, Nancy, is just the impact that it's truly having on, sadly, in a negative way, that social media and other technologies having on the mental health of young people. And we can no longer put our heads in the sand, right? So what can we do? Which kind of, brings me into question number two. What role do schools actually play or should play in supporting the mental health of students.
Well, and it is interesting because, as much as students have 35 hours a week that they're on social media, when they're in our schools, we have them for about 35 hours a week. Right. And so I think we do have an opportunity to speak life and to speak truth and to counter maybe some of the messaging that they're hearing there about their value and their worth and their purpose. Right. We can really come at some of this from a side of being a protective factor, that our schools, if they are safe, if there's a place of connectivity, if there's a place of, building trusted relationships, that in itself is huge. I like the term relational equity. Are we building equity with our students? I was a young life leader for a long, long time. And I know one of the kind of taglines was always, you have to earn the right to be heard, right? Like you had to build relationships in order for the gospel to kind of make sense to that individual, right? Because they saw it out of a lens of love. And so are we doing that in our buildings? Are we cultivating relationships? Are we building safe places so that when life happens, and whether that's a mental health crisis of suicidal ideation or bouts of depression or fear or anger, or maybe it's just life is happening, there's a death in the family, there's something, are we building that relational equity to be able to speak over our students in a way? And I think that's one of the best things that we can do in schools. There's also some really intentional things that I think are really important, for students in our younger grades. Really just what is that classroom kind of wisdom that we're imparting to them? Are we talking about what it means to be a good friend, what it means to not bully, what it means to be kind, what it means to have integrity, what it means to have self-control? Those lessons I think are really valuable, and those all lead to the mental health and just well-being. And then as students get older, I think it's really important. And one, in a Christian school, I think we've got a lot of built-in things that offer just great support, having chapel, having small groups, encouraging just service and self, like not is the key component, but others being a key component. And so that is truly something I think that's valuable. But also, are we being intentional about preventative programming? Are we talking to kids and families about suicidal ideation and how to know the signs of suicide and how to know the signs of mental distress? Are we having conversations about the impact of bullying, whether that's in person or in a social cyber sense? Are we having conversations about, internet safety and digital footprint and what that does to our well-being and to our future? Are we willing to kind of engage in those hard conversations? I think those are all things we can do for mental health. And I think probably the biggest thing that every school needs to have is at least one mental health professional in the building. And I know not everybody has the budget, the space, the time for that, right? That's a difficult thing. But then how are we being intentional about who we partner with? Maybe we are affiliated with a church and there's a pastor that is a pastoral counselor that can be on speed dial when we need them to come in and intervene. Because inevitably our kids are going to go through life and it gets hard, whether that's grief or depression or anger or anxiety or a death in the school family. There are things that are going to happen. So who is there? And if we can't make that investment of one of our own staff, who do we have? What's our protocol? What's our process procedure that we are telling our kids that we value mental health and we're going to have those supports built in as a part of who we are? I think that's really important.
Yeah, that's great, Nancy. Number one thing that jumped out to me is cultivating relationships. I look back at my time as a head of school and even a Christian school teacher, and the students that came back to visit as adults, young adults, or asked, I was a pastor as well, so asked me to do their wedding or came by to visit, sent me Christmas cards. It was the group of students that we intentionally invested in and intentionally created relationships. Yes, we want to be gifted and excellent at instruction and academics and the wraparounds of athletics and fine arts. But at the end of the day, how are we cultivating relationships within those areas And then, I love you actually listed several tools and resources that Christian schools can lean into. And so I think the driving question would be to simply ask as a school, what tools do we have currently in place? What tools are missing? And how do we incorporate the additional tools that we feel like are missing? I think are some valuable questions to ask. And so thank you for sharing some of those key resources that we can potentially lean into. And then the last one is just providing the space to ask and answer the hard questions. I think for many years, sadly, the church and Christian schools and even Christians in general have been afraid to enter this space because it is messy. There's a lot of unknowns. When somebody talks about having thoughts on suicide, when they talk about, well, you know what, I know I was born male, but I've got these feelings, that who can they go to if they can't go to trusted Christians that will lead from a biblical perspective and value the relationship? So thanks so much. And this kind of, brings us into question number 3 here. What are some, Nancy, what are some significant, or excuse me, what are some, I guess, some signs that a child or a teen may be struggling with their mental health? Something that we could visibly see or pick up on that will help educators say, hey, there may be something there.
I think it's really important, and educators, I mean, teachers are my heroes, right? Because they are the ones that are in the classrooms doing the work day to day. And when they've got a student in their classroom, for younger school teachers, right, they're with those students hours in a day. So they see a lot. And for older grades, right, they may only have them for an hour at a time, but that's an hour every day that they get to see them. And so I think one thing that's really important is recognizing that we probably see and know more than we're giving ourselves credit for, right? And not to dismiss those little things. When we see, all of a sudden grades dropping is a significant key. And I can't tell you how many students I've met with, and for some, it definitely is the content is hard and they're just not grasping the section. But more times than not, it has nothing to do with the content, it has everything to do with just where they are, right? They are not in a place where school is the forefront because they're confronted with their own stress or their own anxiety or their own grief or their own just questioning of life and of friends, or they just feel isolated and alone, and maybe they're being bullied, maybe they're in a place. So whenever there's a dip in grades, we just got to follow up. We got to be intentional. We got to be willing, like you said, to ask hard questions. If we're not asking those questions and addressing those things, then who is, right? And if they're just going to their phones for wisdom and for, oh, let me find my purpose, I don't know that I want that for our students, right, at all. I think we can also look for just kind of maybe some very overt things, like our students all of a sudden very angry or very maybe despondent, or maybe there's just a decline in their activity. Our star athletes are just like, no, I'm not going to play anymore. And we see them kind of go into hibernation or in hiding a little bit. Are we seeing them spend excessive amount of time on social media, and why? What is going on? What are they doing? And these are conversations we've got to engage in with our families as well, for them to be aware. They could be in really harmful relationships online, and I think we have to be paying attention to that. If they are really drawn to their phone, there could be someone on there. I had a student once years ago that was in an online relationship, and it absolutely broke his heart. And this was a person he never met, and parents had no idea, right, until it came to a really bad place in his life, and we had to intervene. And when they're falling asleep in class all the time, we need to be paying attention to that, because there's a good chance they're up all night on their phone. And so again, how do we partner with parents? How do we let them know, here's what I'm seeing. Are you seeing this at home? Is this just a school thing? Is school the source of stress? That's a big one too, that we have to address. What's our homework level like? What are the expectations like? Are we really diving into who, kids are at the heart? Or is this all about kind of our agenda and our business? And there's probably a good mix in the middle there somewhere. I think isolation is a big one we need to look for. Are they just kind of isolating, hiding behind things? And students that are being bullied, like, we can't ignore that. It causes a lot of stress behind the scenes and up front. And a lot of times those kids are probably amongst our most vulnerable, where they just feel like they can't get away from it. And it's different, than when I was growing up. If someone was bullying you, you went home and you just forgot about it, right? And you played with your neighborhood friends and it was fine, and you didn't have to deal with it until you got back to school. But nowadays, it's incessant, and it's on the phone, and it's on social media, and maybe they won't name you, but you know that they're talking about you. And so, gosh, we need to be watching those kids pretty heavily to see how they're responding and what is going on. And then what are those ways that we can intervene and, partner with families, partner with mental health professionals to get them help.
That's great, Nancy. And the truth is that you mentioned it. We have time as Christian schools with students during the span of the school year, more so than probably parents and churches. And so paying attention, asking questions, giving space for students to wrestle with it with trusted people in their lives. These are you gave us a great list of things to actually look for so that we can put in place some strategies that students can have to overcome, to get beyond in healthy ways and not be a negative impact upon their mental health. So I just, so grateful for you and your time today. But if you're viewing or you're listening to this particular podcast, Nancy's actually going to be with us at FSI Houston this October, sharing even more strategies around this very topic. So we're looking forward to seeing you again this fall, Nancy. But I just want to take the time now just to thank you so much for journeying with us today around the flourishing construct of well-being, sharing your ideas, your research, and your strategies from your personal practice and calling. So thank you, Nancy.
It absolutely my pleasure. I'm so thankful that we are having these conversations. They're hard, but they're necessary. So Edward, I really, really appreciate just the opportunity to be here.
Yeah, thanks again, Nancy. And just want to tell our viewers and our listeners today, join us next time on the Flourishing Journey podcast as we talk with a school leader and a practitioner about this very important topic of well-being and mental health. We'll see you next time.
The Flourishing Journey is a presentation of the Association of Christian Schools International. Foster a flourishing school culture by visiting acsi.org/flourishing.